Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about an interesting one. We're going to be talking about Strange Darling. This movie is directed by JT Mollner, starring Willa Fitzgerald and Gallner. This is a very small indie thriller that's, I didn't really know anything about it going into this movie. Honestly, I really watched it for two very specific reasons. For one, it had a pull quote from Mike Flanagan, one of my favorite filmmakers ever, on the poster, which said that it was, really brilliant and that you should go in blind to watch this movie, which is exactly what I did. And the other reason why I wanted to watch this movie specifically is because I really did not want to watch The Crow. So here we are talking about Strange Darling, and I have to agree with the sentiments of Mike Flanagan, saying that I'm very glad I went into this movie blind. I do think this is a very bare bones, simple thriller that is told in such a unique way that makes it a lot more interesting than it might have been at face value. And I think the less you know about this movie, the better it'll probably be. I honestly still have not seen the trailer for this movie, so I don't know if the trailer shows too much going into it, but either way, I do think that this is a very interesting movie that is worth a shot going to theaters if you don't want to watch some of the other bigger releases this weekend and you want to support something a little bit smaller and a little bit more, I guess, specific. And as always, we'll be talking about spoilers for Strange Darling, so if you have not seen this film just yet, I would recommend you going into it and then come back here and let's talk about this movie. So what is Strange Darling about? Well, essentially it follows what seems like a normal one-night stand situation until it turns into you watching a serial killer's killing spree along the course of this film. And, I think the way this story is told and the structure of it is by far the most interesting thing about this movie. And it starts off in a very interesting way because it has some, scrolling text that kind of presents you what this story is going to be in a very Fargo-like manner. It says that this is all based on a true story, even though it is very much not based on a true story. I did look it up and confirm that. Just, I honestly thought that, going into this movie when I was seeing this text, I felt like it was very Fargo of them to say this, just to set the tone and the mood of this movie for you to kind of be on the edge of your seat because now you think that it is based on a true story. So that just in general adds a lot of tension to the story right from the very beginning. One of the opening shots of this movie is a woman running directly towards the camera, looking extremely stressed out, looking very tense, running away from something that you don't know exactly what she's running away from. You also get very short glimpses and shots of a man possibly strangling somebody over a bed. You don't exactly see what the situation, what the context is of this shot, but it very much paints a picture that a woman is running away from a dangerous man, and this is the setup of the movie. It also states right at the beginning that this entire movie is shot on 35mm film, which I will be getting into in a second here, but it also does say that this movie is told in 6 chapters, and it starts off with chapter 3. And so like I said, the first chapter, I guess the third chapter of this story is you seeing this woman, I believe she's driving away in a car at first with this guy, chasing her down with a gun, causing her to get in an accident, causing her to run across that field over to a house where she starts frantically knocking on the door. And that's the basic setup that you get at the beginning of the movie, painting the picture of who you think is the victim and who you think is the perpetrator of this crime. And I don't know about your guys' experience with this movie, but I honestly kind of called the twist of this movie right from the very beginning, because if you're going to be telling a story like this in a non-linear fashion, you know that you're missing a lot of context to why this person is running away and why this person is chasing this other person down. And I nailed the fact that the serial killer in this movie is not the guy chasing her with the gun. She is not the victim. She is actually the serial killer that is doing all these terrible things throughout this course of the movie. But also the guy is not completely innocent either. I think this is one of the situations where almost everybody involved in this film, they all suck. But either way, I think the movie is trying to get you in the certain mindset of, accepting the gender norms that you'd see in a situation like this. That is exactly the case with how it goes down in this movie. But like I said, I compare this movie to Fargo, but also to something like Memento, with the way that it is told in non-linear storytelling. When she goes up to knock on the door, that later on in the story, once you see the beginning of chapter 4, that they'll probably start with the perspective inside the house of the lady knocking on the door, adding enough connective tissue on rewatch. But then you jump from chapter 3 to chapter 5, which is where it even became more suspicious of this woman. It starts off with her, I believe, inside this container or this chest inside of this room in complete darkness, hiding from whatever is happening outside, hearing this guy, call for her. And you also get to see his perspective of, going around this house with the gun, and you see somebody dead inside of this house already. And this is where I became very suspicious of her character, because it didn't seem like he was the one who caused this guy's death. It seemed like maybe he was already dead by the time he showed up at this house. So really the only person that would be able to kill him is definitely the woman who is hiding in this chest. She is very much not the innocent character, at least in my head at the very beginning of this story. And so I guess the structure of this is very much giving you enough room to be able to, predict the twists and turns of this movie, but is also engaging you in the story because, again, all this stuff is really intense right from the very beginning. But I think this movie becomes even more interesting once you get to the actual story of why these two characters are in this situation to begin with, and you jump back to chapter 1 at this point in the movie and you get to see how they got into this mess. And you have the woman and this man on a date in this car, and they're talking outside of this motel room, and it's very much leading to a one-night stand type of situation. And it's very much painted in a way that, this woman is trying to make sure that this is a safe environment for her to go into this, hotel room with this strange man. And once you get in there, whatever happens, and she needs to be safe to be able to go into this situation. But the way that the scene is shot in general very much added to my suspicions of this character, because I think there's a lot of red flags in what she says throughout this thing. There's a lot of questions that she asks that seems completely normal, like her straight up asking if this guy is a serial killer and his answer to that and trying to decipher if it is a safe situation for her. But she also says some other things that just feel a little bit off. And like I said, the way it's shot, he's very much shot on like a 45-degree standard angle, but when it comes to all the shots on her, it is completely a side profile. You only see half of her face, and it's really kind of pushing the idea that you are only seeing one specific side of this character and you're not getting the whole picture. But then you go ahead and jump to chapter 4 of this story. You get to start inside of that house that's, Willa Fitzgerald's character run up to at the very beginning of the story, knocking on the door, and you see this couple making breakfast. And honestly, these people are my favorite characters in the entire movie because I thought they were so incredibly funny, and it honestly seemed a little bit out of place and a little bit random. Again, that sort of Fargo type of feel that I got out of this movie was them cooking breakfast, and it keeps on adding more and more butter and more just sugars and sweets to this very over the top pancake and omelet type of thing that they're making. Honestly, it looked delicious, but also looked very disgusting because of how unhealthy it looked and how satisfied that they looked eating this little breakfast until, this character comes knocking at their door. And again, the connective tissue of, jumping between chapters, and once you get the little in-betweens of chapters 1, 3, and 5 that you already saw, now finally seeing chapter 4, you get the context that you've been needing this entire time, because once she is let into the house, she very much does not want them to call the police, and as soon as they decide to call the police, she kills the man in this house. So the cat is out of the bag. You're at the midpoint of this movie now. You know for a definitive fact that she is a serial killer in this situation, and she's threatening the wife of this story and having her take her over to a safer place for her to hide until she just breaks off and runs away, and it gets Willa Fitzgerald's character to go hide inside of that chest that she is found in chapter 5 of the story. And so again, all these little pieces are now coming together. Now you know who the villain of the story is going to be in the lady of this story. And so now we get to jump back to chapter 2 and you get to see exactly what went wrong inside of this motel room. And it starts off with a situation where it looks like this guy is pressuring her into sex and she very much does not want it, and ends up in a situation where this guy is now strangling her on the bed, and she says Mr. Snuffleupagus, and you jump back and you get to see that inside the car, that is what they're talking about. They're talking about a situation where how far are you willing to go essentially to get laid in this moment? Will you satisfy my kinks that I have essentially of being strangled, and like a rape fantasy that she has in this story, which is extremely uncomfortable and unsettling to watch. And you're again painting this guy as the villain of this story, even though he does do some very concerning things later on in the scene in general. But either way, you get to paint him as somebody who is possibly threatening at the very beginning of the scene, and before you jump back and find out that this is all, I guess, the thing that she wanted to do inside of the bedroom, and then she starts acting really weird in this entire situation, and then gets him in a very compromised position, gets him high on cocaine and ketamine, and there's a whole bunch of crazy stuff that happens in this section of the movie that I think is the most uncomfortable section of this movie, but also pushes the fact that I think everything that happens at the beginning of this story, I guess, of chapter 1 and 2, and Willa Fitzgerald's performance as the lady in this movie, I think she is really great, because you can never really know what's going on inside of her head. She is such a wild card in this story, and she's honestly kind of terrifying to me. She's an absolute psychopath in this movie, and I love to see that type of performance in a movie like this. Honestly, a really great femme fatale type of character. I love her costume and her makeup and her wig at the very beginning of this movie before you get into her on the run and her, having her messy hair and having her ear shot off and all these different things. The look of this character, I think, is really, really great and honestly really unrecognizable. I was honestly kind of doubting whether or not she was the same character from the pink-haired wig to the blonde hair that she has later on in the story. And so honestly, really high praise for Willa Fitzgerald in this movie. I believe that she was one of the younger versions of the characters in The Fall of the House of Usher, which is also another Mike Flanagan project, a show that was on Netflix. And I remember that character being really interesting. Honestly, all the actors in that show were really great to begin with, but I think this is very much a star-turning performance from this actress here. And then you get Kyle Gallner as the devil in this movie. I also forgot to mention that at the very beginning of the story, it said that Willa Fitzgerald is playing the lady and Kyle Gallner is playing the devil. And so I guess that also sets the expectation that this guy is going to be the villain of the story. But you see that's, in this situation, he's just kind of going with the things that she told him to do. And so he seems to be fairly cautious, not wanting to go too far with the situation, but also is willing to go that far in order just to get laid. And so he's very much impatient and just wanting to get to, the fun stuff in this, one night stand type of situation until he gets tired of it and he wants to leave. And then he gets drugged and then he just kind of goes insane once he's on drugs because he's literally hunting her down with a gun, with a rifle throughout the last, later half of this movie. And he's honestly also kind of a psychopath. I think if you're going out of this movie thinking, oh, this guy was completely innocent in all of this. No, he clearly did some very terrible things when he called the police station at the end and said, oh, I think I might have gotten myself in a lot of trouble. Yeah, you also got yourself in a lot of trouble in this situation. Again, I think everybody sucks in this situation, but he is still technically not the serial killer in this situation. But also, throughout the entire movie, I was kind of rooting for the lady anyway. The sequence also kind of stresses the two-sided nature of the lady character in this story of being, I guess, a really intense and very, I guess, creepy and disturbing serial killer type of persona once she gets him, high on the ketamine and she ties him to the bed and, she's like carving something in his chest. There's a lot of very twisted things that this character does to this other character in this entire sequence. But once she gets her earshots off and she goes running outside of this place and she now is playing the victim of the situation. She's very great at kind of flipping the dime and being both playing the victim and both the perpetrator in this sort of situation and kind of manipulating everybody else around her, because when she runs into that storefront and she looks absolutely terrified and that some guy is chasing her with a gun, she's trying to get these people to, be on her side. She's a very manipulative character. And again, I think this two-sided nature of this character was very much presented in that earlier shot in the film that honestly, the cinematography in this movie, again, I'll get into that in a second here. But either way, I think the two-sided nature of this character is very much stressed at this point in the movie. And I really love this turn that she has when she kills the other random woman inside of this place, because she can tell that she is not going to be on her side in any sort of way. But also the other woman in this store is a little bit more innocent. She's just going to take her clothes and run off into, stealing her car and driving off, which connects to chapter 3 of the story, which we saw at the very beginning. And so I really love how this movie is structured and how this character is painted at this point in the movie, being this two-sided character. Everything about this entire second sequence is really great. And now you finally get to see chapter 6 of the story and get to see how all these pieces now wrap up together in the finale of this film. So now that we have all the information we need, we can go back to the end of chapter 5 where Kyle Gallner was looking for her and he shoots a shot into the chest, and we don't know what happened to the lady inside of the chest because she's now shot. She's now injured at this point in the story and she's chained up into this, this freezer on the ground, and she is very much in a very compromised position, and she's again playing the victim in this case. She's playing very scared at this point in the movie, even though she has some sort of control. She has a bear spray inside of that freezer with her, and Kyle Gallner does not know that she has that, and so she's able to spray him and to bite his neck off, and he starts bleeding. This is a very brutal sequence. She is completely demented in this entire section of the movie, but I absolutely love to see all the gore in this section of the movie as he falls down and begins to die, and she takes a gun from him, and that's when the police arrive and things get even more complicated from here. This is another point in the movie where I say everybody sucks in this situation, except for, I guess, the female cop. I think that she kind of had at least the right mindset going to the situation, because it very much looks, at least the way that Will Fitzgerald kind of, painted the situation, very much looks like he was the bad guy and that she's a victim, yet this male cop is like, no, we don't know all the facts here. We can't take this woman who's clearly shot and in pain and bleeding out on the floor. We can't take her to the hospital. We need to figure out what is going on first. Like, no, you see somebody who's literally bleeding on the ground, you should probably want to help her, even though, yes, he is technically right. She is actually the villain of this story. She is actually going to cause the death of some of these characters going forward. Either way, I do think that's the way that he represented the situation, the way that he was going to handle it, was very much wrong. Again, everybody kind of sucks in this situation. At this point, she does admit that she is the Electric Lady. That is her serial killer name that she has in the story, which, great name for a serial killer, by the way. But once she does have them pull over, she lets the female cop go because she was the one who treated her with respect once, they kind of stumbled upon the compromised position that she was in. And you can tell that this character is very much killing only people that she deems to be deserving of being killed. She has let go many people earlier in the film, and she is also stressed to a lot of people in this film that I really don't want to do this to you specifically, and we'll get into the reasons as to why she has that belief later on here. But at least in this moment, she lets the female cop go. She has the guy drive her off forward until they finally stop, and she has this really great turn where she's kind of holding the gun towards him, and he has this look to her inside the rearview mirror, and her face kind of switches from a normal standard face to looking completely demented all of a sudden, and you get a cut away with some really great building tension in the music, and you hear the gunshot and the blood splatter on the windshield of this car. And I love this moment. And once this woman kind of runs out and gets picked up by another person in a car, she has this line where she sees the devil in people, and that is why the Kyle Gallner guy was called the devil in the script, because she saw him as a devil. Whenever she sees somebody as a devil, that is who she deems worthy to be killed, because that is her motto as a serial killer, essentially. And you also get that same flash once she sees herself inside of the side view mirror of the car, and you see that she sees herself as the devil at this point in the story as well. And the other woman who's picking her up inside this car in this hitchhiking type of situation notices that she does have a gun, and that she does shoot and kill the electric lady in this moment of the story, which is a very interesting thing, because you kind of hold on this shot of her slowly dying and her kind of debating with herself whether or not she's going to pull out the gun from her jacket and kill this woman that has her in the car. But I think that she decides not to in this moment, because she has that, I guess, weird moral code to who she does and who she doesn't kill in this story, and that she broke that rule when she killed the couple, the mountain people, inside the house earlier on in this film. But I guess everybody else that she killed, she at least deemed that they were a devil in her eyes, and so it was worth it for this character. And honestly, I find that as a character study, as kind of breaking down the reasons as to why this character does all these things, I think is really interesting. I think if you were to take her word as seeing the devil in certain people from the very beginning on rewatch, and kind of see her decisions and how it is motivated throughout the entire story, when did she decide that this Kyle Gallner guy was the devil? Was it earlier on in the car, or was it once they're in the intimate scenes inside of the motel room? When is the switch in her head flipped at any given moment to see somebody as a devil? What sparks that inside of her mind? And you can definitely see that inside of her performance throughout this entire movie. And honestly, again, I think that is one of the strongest aspects of this movie, is the way it tells a story, the way it presents this character, and the way that it kind of keeps you guessing as to what this character is going to do from one scene or from one chapter to the next, because I think it is very uniquely told. But then let's go back to one of those text cards that was at the very beginning of the movie, saying that this entire film was shot on 35mm film. And honestly, when that first showed up in the film, I kind of rolled my eyes thinking, oh, look at this big time filmmaker making his movie on film in the year 2024. Good for you, guy. Yeah, sure, have your pretentious little text on the front of the screen, preceded by the best looking movie of the entire year. I think this movie looks completely gorgeous, and I think it very much earns the fact that it says it's shot on 35mm film right at the very beginning. I was proven wrong for my eye rolling moment at the beginning of the story, because every single frame of this movie is gorgeous. I love how this movie is shot. You can tell that all the highlights are blooming in the way that film lets it bloom. The colors really pop in this movie. The depth really pops in this movie, and just everything, all the benefits of shooting a movie on film is very much highlighted here. It's one of those things where when a film boasts that it is shot entirely on film, you kind of roll your eyes at it at first, because digital can look really good. It can do all these things for you, and you don't really appreciate film until you watch something that is entirely shot on film, that you're watching on the big screen for the first time, and you really do appreciate it once you finally do get a film that has so much care into every single frame of the movie that this movie has. And then you see that Giovanni Ribisi is the cinematographer of this movie, who is a very popular actor. I believe he was in Friends and a few other things. I recognize him as the random scientist guy in the first Avatar movie. Yeah, that scientist guy, that is how I recognize him as an actor. But he was the cinematographer of this film, and honestly, he did a phenomenal job. I believe this is the first feature film he has acted as a DP on, and completely knocked it out of the park. Like I said, I think this is the best looking movie of the entire year so far. Like I said, every frame is like a work of art. This movie is really, really impressive on a technical end, on a structural end, on a script end, and on a character end. But I do think this movie is a bit thin thematically. I think if it did have anything to say about, sexual assault, it would kind of be agreeing with that one guy cop, and his reaction to that situation would be the technically correct one in this situation, which is a wild thing to say. So I don't think that's what the movie is trying to say thematically. And I do think if you do think about this movie any deeper in terms of things like that, I do think it kind of falls apart and it gets really messy. So I think it's best to just see this movie as a pretty straightforward thriller that is told in a more unique way. nothing really beyond that. But overall, I'm very glad that I did give Strange Darling a chance, that I did go ahead and watch this film. In terms of all the other films that are out this weekend, I think this is very much the most interesting film out there. I do want to watch Blink Twice. I'm not sure if I'll get a chance to watch that. I very much do not want to watch The Crow. I haven't heard many good things about it, at least really anything about it so far, and they're really holding back the review embargo, so I probably won't be talking about The Crow here on the channel, but maybe I will be talking about Blink Twice. But either way, those are just going to be my thoughts on Strange Darling. If you watch this entire review and had me spoil all of it, I would still recommend it. Go into watching it. It's a very fun and unique movie. But if you did go ahead and watch it, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of the storytelling? What do you think about the cinematography? Were you as blown away by the look of this film as I was? Let me know in the comment section down below for sure. If you did enjoy this review, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. There's been a lot of interesting films in the past month or so. From Longlegs on, there's always been either a big horror movie or a smaller indie horror movie that's been very interesting, and this is yet another film in that lineup of all these interesting films that I've talked about here on the channel. But like I said, those are just going to be my thoughts on Strange Darling. Comment down below your thoughts, leave a like, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.